Zombie power will soon fuel the nation, and it will be an absolutely green, clean, renewable resource, ultimately too cheap to even meter. And so there is that. Zombies on treadmills. Of course, the early prototypes of the giant hamster wheel technology did prove to be laughably inefficient, but once we were able to figure out the gear ratios and such, well, I think it's becoming more efficient all the time. Naturally, the electrode implants to sync up all the zombies was a very important innovation also. Otherwise, they would have been all herky-jerky and pell-mell and helter-skelter and all out of sync. So it was very important to ultimately figure out how to sync them all up. And of course, the rest is history.
Tonight on the podcast, the People's Candidate and new Libertarian Presidential Candidate Vermin Supreme and I talk about ponies and government disclosure. That and more coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
My guest tonight is no stranger to foreign affairs, policy, matters of state, smoke-filled rooms, electioneering, and campaigning. Vermin Supreme has been doing that for about 32 years, and it started in Baltimore, Maryland. Vermin Supreme, thank you for joining me, and welcome, sir.
Greetings, my fellow Americans and others. As your president, I have promised to engage in hostilities only with those powers I deem to be a real and immediate danger to our peace-loving nation. That is why I have ordered the Strategic Space Force Air Command to begin the bombing of Narnia in 5 minutes. If we do not fight them in their dimension there, we will have no choice but to fight them in our dimension here. We will not stop until we have destroyed Middle Earth. In this time of need, we must unite as a nation. I hope you will all pray for all our fearsome flying unmanned killer robot pony drones as they rain fire and death upon our subhuman enemy and various innocent wedding parties. May our brave soldiers may not be afflicted by carpal tunnel syndrome while conducting these long-distance atrocities, or may they not suffer from terrible nightmares from the horror they must inflict. Hello.
And I couldn't have said it better myself, even if I had tried or even if I had taken notes on that. But that's beautiful, and some of those are fighting words for some of my listeners, of course, and others who are very, very violent and don't appreciate aliens as much as some would be on your side, for sure.
Yes, I am proposing a concrete dome over the entire country in order to protect us from this alien invasion I hear so much about.
So what do you think of this Space Force business? now that you brought it up?
Well, I am more about Space Horse, and I believe that ponies in space are an essential part of a defense system that we most certainly need now more than ever, or at least now more than last time.
Indeed, and
Yep.
I was going very deep for this show and was thinking back, and I wanted to talk presidents with you and presidential candidates. I myself have actually met. You're my fifth presidential candidate that I've met. I met Ronald Reagan. This is dating myself, but back in 1977, I met Jesse Jackson in 87. Joe Biden, February 11th, 2014. Of course, I'm from Montana, and the Montana governor, Steve Bullock, is running for president now. So do you ever sit?
I did not know that.
Yeah, he's running. So did you ever sit and chat, or have you sat and chat with other candidates on the road? Are you making memories with Mitt Romney, or is it just a lot of work?
Well, I do try and debate as many candidates as I possibly can. I'm very lucky because I do have a proximity to New Hampshire. And, of course, New Hampshire is the first in the nation presidential primary state. And as such, pretty much every candidate who is running will eventually show up in New Hampshire. Oftentimes they have a campaign headquarters and campaign staff and campaign buses and campaign events. And they are like bouncing all over this state of New Hampshire, so oftentimes it's very easy to run into them or track them down. In fact, bird dogging, as it is called, which involves asking the candidates pointed questions, ideally, I suppose, is quite a hobby of many citizens of the great state of New Hampshire. And I have had various run-ins over the years and have utilized my sense of the absurd and my platforms of ponies and time travel and mandatory toothbrushing laws and the such to elicit reactions from the various candidates. In fact, if you were to Google up Vermin Supreme and Chris Christie or Vermin Supreme and Ted Cruz, you will have two very fine examples of that. In the one, I had the opportunity to ask Mr. Christie where he stood on mandatory toothbrushing laws. He admitted that it was important. Then when I asked him about free ponies, well, he came out foursquare against them. He was forced to drop out of the race shortly thereafter. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, was able to deconstruct and turn my entire mandatory toothbrushing law inside out and show it for what it actually was, a critique of the nanny state and things of that nature. John McCain once admitted to me that Karl Rove was responsible for dynamiting the Old Man of the Mountain, a beloved landmark up in New Hampshire.
I thought that was
And I asked Bob Dole once if he supported mandatory toothbrushing. He responded as long as it was locally controlled, which certainly was in character for him. And then I asked what he would do about the weather. That was a question I was asking as early as 1992. What would the candidate do about the weather? And he said he was going to pray for good weather on Election Day. I had John McCain once when I asked him about mandatory toothbrushing. He informed me that his staff had great experience hiding in people's bathrooms late at night to make sure that they brushed their teeth, which I found to be a little odd and scary. Lamar Alexander, the senator, he was running for president one time, and I asked him if it was true that he had Elvis Presley imprisoned underneath the governor's mansion in Tennessee because he was governor of Tennessee. And he pulled me aside and responded that he did, in fact, have Elvis Presley imprisoned for committing heinous acts. And that's a quote.
I think, I don't know if he's still there, but I know Elvis has been spotted in Wakefield, Michigan, and which is really interesting to me. Yeah.
Good for him. I'm glad he's doing okay. He's got to be pretty old these days, though.
Yes. So when you're hitting the campaign headquarters and bird dogging, as you call it, some nice digs out there. Any free eats there at the local campaign headquarters, especially in Massachusetts, because
Occasionally, there is. Occasionally, they'll feed the campaign staffs. More likely, I guess, if you're looking for the free food events, I think you're going to wait till the night of the election, and then all the candidates have their various victory parties, if you will, and oftentimes they involve free beer.
is that invitation only, or do you get an invitation, or how many invitations do you get?
But many of them, if not most of them, are open to the public.
Very nice.
Of course, oftentimes they're very selective about which members of the public they're actually going to allow in. And yes, I have been denied entry over the years in various locations for various reasons. Oftentimes revolving around just the simple boot that I have on my head. They can't quite wrap their own heads around the boot that is on my head.
And that's just discrimination, if you ask my opinion. And that's, many campaigns are about that, or not discrimination, but about anti-discrimination. So that's not fair. But you did bring up one thing that I wanted to talk about too, is the weather. And of course, our president has been talking recently, or has mentioned recently, about nuking hurricanes. And any opinion on that one? Because that's a pretty big deal, pretty expensive deterrent.
It's a war on weather, I think. And,
yeah,
it's a start. It's a start on attacking climate change. So I welcome it.
The war on weather. Let me ask you this: how much energy does it take you to run a campaign like in 2020? And will the energy run out before the money? Tell me about that.
In terms of kilowatts, or
either and or. It takes a lot of energy out of you,
calories,
for sure.
And once again, of course, I mean, They say Google eats up about 1% of the nation's electricity, just simply keeping all that computer equipment cool. And of course, they say that growing marijuana apparently uses about 1% of the U.S. electricity in America. And since a lot of people Google me up and I smoke a lot of weed, I guess I am using up a fair amount of energy. Ultimately, I like my own weed to be solar powered, of course, if at all possible.
For sure.
But of course, the fact of the matter is that zombie power will soon fuel the nation, and it will be an absolutely green, clean, renewable resource, ultimately too cheap to even meter. And so there is that. Once we
and how does that work? Is it zombies on treadmills, or how do we harness that energy? Zombie power.
It is exactly that. It is indeed zombies on treadmills. Of course, the early prototypes of the giant hamster wheel technology did prove to be laughably inefficient. But once we were able to figure out the gear ratios and such, I think it's becoming more efficient all the time. Naturally, the electrode implant to sync up all the zombies was a very important innovation also. Otherwise, they would have been all herky-jerky and pell-mell and helter-skelter and all out of sync. So it was very important to ultimately figure out how to sync them all up. And, of course, the rest is history.
So what exactly is the average lifetime of a zombie now? And how do you figure that?
They just keep going until they sort of fall apart, really. I mean, sure, they smell. I mean, but we dip them in polyurethane to try and prevent that part.
It's a good approach. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
So
it's all there in my new book. If you have not read my new book, it's a real book, an actual book called I, Pony, Blueprint for a New America. And this is a book about the future. It's a book about the future long after a Vermin Supreme presidency, after everybody has their free pony, after mandatory toothbrushing law and the secret dental police have set up checkpoints every couple hundred yards after zombie power has fueled the nation, and time travel is used as a common everyday occurrence in foreign policy. It is, in fact, a warning from the people of the future to you, the people of their past, your present, of course, that Vermin Supreme is a madman and must be stopped. Thank you. I'm Vermin Supreme. That is, of course, available at iponythebook.com or iponybook.com. Or if you go to my campaign website, https://Vermin Supreme 2020 with the numbers 2020.com, you will find a way to get to my online shop, which is a fundraising device from my campaign, and you can purchase that exciting book. It's a wonderful book. It's actually a novella. I wrote it to be 100 pages because a short story was just going to be too short, and so I made it 100 pages, and that makes it a novella. And of course, a novella was simply too long for me to write. But this book has amazing artwork from over 15 different artists illustrating each and every chapter, and it's a very handsome book. It's a very large book. It's suitable for your coffee table. It's not quite a graphic novel, but by golly, it sure could be someday. We'll have to see about that.
So Amazon actually says it's 212 pages. Does it have a lot of those, this page intentionally left blank inside of it, or where'd the 212 come from?
I think that's a lot of artwork, and
Gotcha.
and the text is rather large. So it's like it took up more pages that way.
14 point times Roman.
It's great for like old people to read, but ultimately the text is well, I wrote it to be 100 pages. I'm glad it ultimately ended up to be twice as many.
On the website, you have a really nice website, and I was looking at that earlier, and actually when talking about the book, you're actually quoting Ernest Hemingway in there. And so what's the relationship there?
I don't recall that quote.
All you have to do is write one true sentence, write the truest sentence you know, Ernest Hemingway, and that's under authors and artists. But you know, that's
funny. Are you sure? Is that a review, or is that something I quoted?
Well, maybe I don't know. It's a link to your book. Maybe it's somebody else actually has your book linked, and a couple of places do actually. You can find it on Amazon. Bob's Mystic Books. That's the quote. I guess he probably did.
Bob's Mystic. Yes. Is the official publisher. If you actually buy it directly from the publisher, Bob's Mystic Books, then we get a little bit more money.
Nice.
It was a wonderful thing because a lot of these artists are artists of whose work I've been fans for many years. Some were just fan artists that popped up on my feed, and it was just nice to be able to actually offer them a percent, or I think they all got like 1% for their artwork, and so that was, I felt very good about not asking people to do things for free.
Yeah, it's very cool too because they have the different artists listed, and it tells a little bit about each one, and it's a nice little book, actually. And
absolutely, and on my campaign merchandise website, we will be featuring all the different artists and the different artwork on a variety of different products. So that's very exciting. In fact, let me read you a small little segment from the book.
That'd be great. I would love that.
Call it like a little
and the book currently does have 100% only customers reviews right now, so that's good.
No, I think there's a lot of fun reviews. The reviews are very entertaining in and of themselves, and of course it was a wonderful and a very fun book to write because it was a book that I had no idea where it was going to go, what it was going to be, what was going to happen. And so as I was writing it just surprised me every day that I would write a new little section trying to figure out what else might happen. So this is a little section that I will be reading for you now.
Thank you.
Starting now.
Do you need music or anything?
I guess you could dub some in post. Maybe. There were harsh political realities when President for Life, Vermin I, took office. At the time of his ascent to the White House, there were over 300 million Americans in America's previous borders. At the time, there were only 200,000 ponies in the whole country. It was a recipe for civil unrest. And these were not just political realities, these were realities. There was a very stark choice to be made. On the table, would it be the mass execution of some 299,700,000 plus Americans in order to achieve proper pony human parity, or something else? His misspoken claim during his inauguration to faithfully execute the American people was sounding visionary. It is certainly true that such a mass execution would create jobs. It would also lessen the country's dependence on foreign oil. It would be good for the environment. Although there were some drawbacks to consider, mostly they were merely questions of ethics and public relations. During his time of widespread civil unrest, all options were on the table. The dental high command was put on high alert. The dental re-education camps were readied. Homeland Dental Security coordinated with the nation's dental police departments. The militarization of America's dental police forces had been a great idea that was about to pay off in lower incidences of gum disease nationwide. There were riots in the streets of numerous cities. Pulsating water-pick cannons knocked rioters off their feet and knocked the plaque right off of their teeth. The population was demanding their ponies that were nowhere in sight. It was a time of heightened international tensions. No one would have blamed Tyrant Supreme if he had ordered the National Dental Guard to carry out a full-scale massacre of the civilian population. It was high time, actually. The veneer of civility that had protected Americans from such real political unrest for quite some time was wearing thin. The quaint and oft-repeated notion that it can't happen here was truly just a lack of imagination. Thank you.
Very, very, very nice. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. So that's sort of give you a little bit of the flavor of what it is.
1987, and you first ran for office. What was that?
Oh yes, I thought I thought that was an alternate title, 1987. It would have been a great follow-up, 1984. What was your question again? I'm sorry.
You first ran for public office in 1987, or was it earlier? What was your first office that you ran for?
Well, in high school, I was mayor for the day.
Oh, nice.
But that really hardly counts. Although I did get to drive around with the actual mayor of my hometown for the day. And
was that in Baltimore?
Close enough, we'll say. But yes, in 1987 was my first sort of official pretend campaign, if you will. It was the mayor of Baltimore, Maryland, and it was, in fact, something to do. It wasn't a political decision at the time. I was quite burned out on Baltimore, and I was simply looking for an interesting project that might give me something to do. And that was what I drunkenly announced one night at my local bar. In the meantime, I actually did leave Baltimore. The Great Peace March for Global Nuclear Disarmament, which was a march for peace that left L.A. and went to D.C. This was in 1986. Was a march for peace. And by the time it rolled into Baltimore, it had 5,000 people on board with the entire infrastructure that was required to move such a thing down the road. And when I saw it, I was inspired by it, and I ran to the thrift store, grabbed a fresh change of clothing, a cheap sleeping bag, and I started walking with them. And I walked with them to Washington, D.C., and I met a very interesting number of people, including some anarchists, and several of them purchased some of the equipment, including a kitchen trailer, a water trailer, some porta potty trailers, and some trucks to tow all that stuff. And essentially, they formed a collective that's called Seeds of Peace, and their purpose was to help move protest marches down the road. And so I joined up with them in Florida. We marched from Kings Bay, Georgia, down to Cape Canaveral. Up in Kings Bay is where a bunch of nuclear submarines are stationed. And Cape Canaveral, in addition to being the place where the space shuttle took off from, was also the location where they were testing the Trident D5 missile, which was a first strike destabilizing technology. So there was a lot of people doing backcountry actions, invading Cape Canaveral, trying to postpone or delay the tests. So that was my introduction and early beginning into activism. At that time, I also started bringing my political campaign into political demonstrations. And at that time that I started traveling with this collective doing Peace March support work, I was also attending rainbow gatherings for the first time. And so these two things, attending national political events and the rainbow gatherings, they started to give me my first national network of individuals who began to take note of my campaign. It was also where I began to learn a number of skills during the peace marches and stuff, and actions out at the Nevada nuclear test site. There was certainly need for peacekeeping and peacekeepers, and so I started taking nonviolent direct action trainings and giving nonviolent direct action trainings and participating in nonviolent direct action. And at the rainbow gatherings, simultaneously, I was learning to be a clown and pushing the limits on what I could do in terms of humor with my body and my words. And then started bringing in the clowning into the campaigning, into the political environment, into my peacekeeping. So I started using my peacekeeping skills, which is essentially just sort of glorified camp counselor, if you will, to intervene in crisis intervention situations. And then after a while, I started doing security at the rainbow gatherings. And part of security at the rainbow gatherings involves offering the opportunity to walk with the police in order to help try and keep them out of trouble, give them escorts, if you will. And so this gave me the opportunity to start doing an 8-hour shift of walking through the rainbow gathering with 8 Alabama State Troopers, for example. Are you familiar with the rainbow gatherings?
Absolutely. Yep. The first time I ever saw that, there was one in Montana. I think it was probably about right around 80 that I first saw one.
Nice. Yes. So me and my wife have been attending those for some 30 years. And like I say, it's where I picked up quite a bit of my skills. And it's also where I learned everything I knew about practical anarchy, because, there are no leaders. There are nobody's in charge. If anything needs to get done, it gets done because the people come together and make it so. For your viewers or your listeners, a rainbow gathering is an event, a temporary autonomous zone. It can have 10, 20,000 hippies out in the woods. Dinner circle would consist of 3,000 or 4,000 people sitting in concentric circles. 100 different kitchens might be in the woods. They will send down 5-gallon buckets full of food. Everybody will get fed. During this dinner circle, a magic hat will go around. Because these are non-commercial events, there's no way to spend your money. So people chip their money into the magic hat. This magic hat money goes to the banking council. which is a totally transparent organization. Anybody can be a member. The money is counted. That number is announced to the dinner circle. The next morning, that money goes to the supply council. The kitchen council meets. The kitchens all decide what they need from town. They tell supply. The supply council goes into town, brings back the supplies, gives the kitchen their supplies. Then the kitchens cook the food, and it goes over again, night after night for several weeks out in the woods. Like I say, it's a non-commercial event. It's an acoustic event. It's a non-electric event. But there are talent shows. There are roving musicians. There are so much campfire entertainment, storytelling, gong shows, just anything you can possibly think of. And it's a really amazing thing. But it is certainly where I picked up many of the skills that I was able to bring out into the world. But perhaps I get ahead of myself. So after I had left Baltimore, a year had passed, and I realized that I had committed myself to running for mayor of Baltimore, Maryland. At that time, as the election was drawing near, the collective Seeds of Peace was on a march with Habitat for Humanity at the time, I think. And I ended up sitting it out, and I spent a month in a drug study as a human guinea pig for one of the pharmaceutical companies. And I was earning enough money to be able to run my campaign at that time. And so I think I got $1,000 for the 30 days. And then I spent that money on computer typesetting. We typeset up my platform, which was somewhat similar, if not reminiscent of what it is today, and a bunch of posters. And we went to Baltimore, and I campaigned the hell out of that town. Put posters all over, busted out my bullhorn. It was the first time I campaigned with a bullhorn, and made a little splash, and got a taste for what would eventually become quite a ongoing, never-ending hobby of mine, campaigning.
So when you say you were a guinea pig, what were they they were obviously testing something on you. What was that?
I did a whole lot of studies, and I don't even recall what half the drugs were. I also used to do studies for the Henry Ford Sleep Disorder Clinic, and they were pretty fun ones. You would go in late at night. They would plug all the electrodes on your head. They would record your sleep. You would wake up in the morning. They would give you a big pitcher of screwdrivers, vodka, and orange juice. You'd get shit-faced, and then you would play video games, simulated driving. Nice. Things along those lines. I used to do that for money back when I was a young person. Selling plasma, all that good stuff.
Good times.
Dumpster diving, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That was part of the activist, low-rent hippie lifestyle. That's a fact. And me and my wife traveled around the country for 3 years, living in a cab-over-camper, doing political events, which ultimately included the campaigning for presidency. Yes, it's been a long time of excitement, and I think 1992 was the first time that I went up to the New Hampshire primary and made my pitch and got my first national exposure, if you will. And I think the thing that clicked that time was I was challenging various candidates to a dueling chainsaw grudge match to the death in the steel cage of doom. And I got Tom Harkin with that one. I got a young Bill Clinton with that one. He demurred. He begged off. He chickened out, unfortunately. That's how that whole mess started, if you will.
So this question has been I'm glad you're here because you can answer this question, but I grew up right in the middle of Minuteman Missile, Montana. And why doesn't anyone care about dismantling nuclear weapons anymore? Why aren't there any ongoing protests? And why did that end when we still have so many nuclear weapons in the U.S.?
Well, I think what probably and that it was all those nuclear missile treaties that the USSR and the U.S. Eventually hammered out, and it really seemed that we were pulling back from the brink of the nuclear cliff. It seems like there's always, every few years, every generation, an issue comes up that galvanizes a lot of people and a lot of young people, and they jump on board. There's the anti-nuclear protests of the anti-war protests of the 70s, of course, the anti-nuclear protests of the 80s, the Occupy movement that came into being, the activities against the protests against globalization were very, very big for a stretch in the late 90s, 2000, I guess up until 9/11, sort of took the wind out of that one. It's a wonderful thing to see, because essentially, when I was a young person and looked around and saw all what needed to be done and met all these like-minded people, and we all got together and made our own echo chambers and wanted our voice to be heard and wanted some input on the policy that was affecting our lives. These things come, they rise up. Black Lives Matter was a very powerful and potent force. Some movements get co-opted. Sometimes the Democrats will try and co-opt a whole movement. Sometimes the FBI and COINTELPRO will come in and destroy a movement like they did to the Black Panthers. Of course, people get older. Young activists grow up a little bit and have families and get jobs and then jump on that treadmill that's very hard to get off of. I've been very lucky. My wife and I have been able to structure our lifestyle in a very minimalist fashion. No kids, no pets, no credit card debts. We still dumpster dive our food and have cheap rent. And these things have allowed us to be able to not be 100% engaged in employment activities, and yet we've been able to save enough to travel and still get to the protests that we need to get to and things of that nature.
You being from Baltimore area was that city certainly had its times of tumultuous activities and sometimes it has gotten a bad rap, and lately the president has said some negative things about Baltimore. But why does Baltimore get a bad rap? Because it's a really cool city. I like Baltimore.
Yeah, it is. Don't really know. Don't really know. I guess maybe it's just the intensifying wealth inequality. There's certainly a lot of really groovy things there, but there's also a lot of very harsh poverty and all the attendant desperation and violence that comes from that. So I guess that's what people are focused on, the negatives as opposed to the positives. And
so back in the 80s, I read that you were in Baltimore and you were booking bands for underground clubs. Do you remember what the biggest or most notable band you booked back then would have been?
Well, because there was no real budget for any sort of guarantees for any of the bands, it was mostly all local. It was all local original music, and it was Vermin Supreme's Fabulous Galaxy Lounge and the Marble Bar on Congress Street in the Congress Hotel. And I guess the biggest acts that I ended up booking was the Slicky Boys, which was sort of the DC based band. Root Boy Slim, whose big hit was Boogie Till You Puke. Let's see. Oh, goodness, I can barely. What was that band? The Jad and Jarrett Fair, the Fair Brothers. What was their?
Half Japanese.
Half Japanese,
Oh
yes.
My God. I cannot believe you brought that up. That's like, how I ever got into that, I'm really into that. So that's a good one. Wow.
I'm glad that you knew that. It just wasn't clicking. But we had some Motor Morons and Infant Lunch and
Right.
just a million local original Baltimore bands from the '80s that nobody would have ever heard of unless you were part of that scene at that time. For sure. I also
go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying I also frequented Jules's loft, the Utah Street Loft, which was a total underground punk rock venue, and saw a lot of serious punk rock bands back in the day for sure. True Sounds of Liberty, Fear, Scream, all them,
Right.
all of them. I saw them all. Yeah, fuck yeah.
I think one of the interesting things is you brought up Half Japanese, and there's a movie, a documentary called Half Japanese, the band that would be king. And you watch that and it is so real. I mean, it is so raw and it is so real, but then at the end you're questioning, does this band really exist? Because it's one of those things, and the movie is made very well and it kind of makes you question that, but it depicts the life of this band, and they come out with their first, instead of doing a single, instead of doing a 45, it's a box set, and it has artwork in it. It has cassettes in it. It's an amazing movie, and it makes you really question the legitimacy of the movie, as well as it links into other different bands on the East Coast that kind of were brought up the same way. And it's just an amazing movie. And I don't really know many people other than a couple of my friends who've ever even seen it or heard about it, but it's one of my favorite documentaries or movies ever.
I will have to keep an eye out for that one. And I think I booked the Boston band, The Neighborhoods, one time, and my PA guy left, and we had no sound system, and they were very upset. But what can you do?
Good story.
But yeah, it was a very good time. We always had a whole lot of fun, and I would book. I'd do bills like bluegrass and heavy metal, or I would just really mix things up. We had poetry nights and Grateful Dead nights, and I would bring in dog acts and novelty acts, and it was just a really wonderful time for sure in Baltimore, and my life.
Ironically, boss, Baltimore is on the map for other things, but then again, it's also if you're going to book a cheap fare to Washington D.C. and you're not careful, if you're on Priceline.com, it's going to fly you to Baltimore. So Baltimore has the spillover for the D.C. cheap ticket flights, and I've ended up there myself, and that's really the only reason that I've ever been there, and I was happy that happened, and it was a good twist of fate, and I ended up there and had a really good time one night. So yeah, there's that.
Oh yeah, I mean Baltimore when I was there had a wonderful art weirdo scene. I mean some of the weirdest, strangest art types around were there, and it was just I learned a lot. I cut my teeth, and definitely gained a good chunk of my sensibility while I was there.
There's a clip of you online. It's from 1996, and it's very interesting to me because you have this nicely trimmed brown beard, and now it's a little bit longer and a bit gray, and which actually is kind of very symbolic of someone who has been through the stress of a presidency and is marked by age. Do you think that you've just been doing the presidential work and you're getting the gray hairs and not the credit?
Well, once again, I think I know for a fact the only reason that I have gotten as far as I have is because I never stopped doing it. If I had stopped doing it, I wouldn't be here right now. Obviously, it would have been, and it would have all been over long ago. Back in the day, I think it's very worthwhile noting that when my hair was not all gray, and when I was younger and playing this crazy thing on the street, it was very easy for people to dismiss that. Look at that crazy hippie boy with the rubber boot on his head. He's a crazy hippie. But now that I'm much older, I have total gravitas. I mean, these lines on my face are very powerful. And now I'm essentially the elder statesman of Wingnut. And I think that's a pretty fun place to be.
In that same clip in 1996, you said, as I look upon your sea of shining faces, you were in Washington, D.C., as I look upon your sea of shining faces, all 1 million of you, and I don't care what the park police counted as. I mean, that sounds familiar. We heard that, something like that, after the last presidential inauguration. Where did that come from?
Yes. It's very true. A lot of the things that I've said over the years seem to have been almost prophetic, if you will. I mean,
Absolutely.
Let's face it, the mandatory toothbrushing bill was pretty much the Patriot Act that I wrote. I wrote
It's
before the Patriot Act, and it seems to have happened. Of course, the free ponies, I feel that I can take total credit for that entering the political lexicon, if you will. I mean, free ponies it was pretty much an actual campaign touchstone the last go round. People are, oh, where's the pony? Where's my free pony and all that stuff. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I guess just being in it long enough has had things come to life. And of course, the fact that I found these amazing touchstones as campaign planks that have such incredible resonance. The mandatory toothbrushing law, that was inspired by the early seatbelt laws in my home state of Massachusetts. It was one of the first states that actually made a mandatory seatbelt law. And I said to myself, what could be more silly? I mean, it's a good idea, sure, but what would be a more ridiculous thing to try and enforce? And I came up with toothbrushing. And there was a bumper sticker at the time that said, buckle up, it's the law. So I simply changed that to brush your teeth, it's the law. And it made a lot of sense and had this great resonance with the people. I traveled Euroland back in '98, and I translated the phrase, brush your teeth, it's the law, or you'll be arrested by the secret dental police. And pretty much everybody in every country got that simple linkage. And so I've been very lucky to find these, very simple, yet effective and elegant things that have such resonance that they've really had staying power, and the people really, really like them, and they like to talk about it, and they like to envision it, and they like to pretend along with it. And I think that's one of the another attractive thing about my campaign is because it really gives adults and kids the opportunity to pretend, to start envisioning and stretching their minds and trying to think, what would it be like if there were ponies everywhere, and what if all these cars were actually ponies, and we were driving down the highway on our ponies, and it's been broken down financially. Of course, the government can afford to give you a pony. They totally can.
Absolutely.
They can afford to bankroll all these wars, but where's our ponies, people? Where's our ponies?
And I think I like your message too. You talked about it just a few minutes ago and talked about you and your wife, and the quality of life is a big thing. People are absolutely forgetting what quality of life is and what the premise of that is and how that happens. And we become so focused on something that doesn't even matter, that quality of life is just going away in America as we speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just really hard enough for people to just to make their living, just to pay their bills, pay their rent, pay off their credit cards, pay off their student debt. It just seems like that is the way the system has been designed in order to, the people, the citizens are the product. They exist to bankroll the government, to spend money on objects and things that they may or may not need. It's a very interesting scam that somebody has figured out, and we are all paying for very dearly. And it's very hard to buy back your own time. I mean, I've got very lucky. I have a little house in the woods, and life is really, really sweet. But I know it's not like that for most people.
Sam Donaldson says the press is under no obligation to pay attention to you. He says that you're not serious about running for president. What do you say about doubters and haters out there?
Well,
I think Sam had
The
good
road-
intentions.
let me say this. The transition to a full pony-based economy will not be an easy one. There will be some grumblers, pony haters in the beginning. There will be those that scream big government. These malcontents will be dealt with swiftly and harshly. Many pundits will argue that it would never work. They will be sent to the work camps to be shown otherwise. We will use social safety nets to catch and contain the poor people. Yes, the road to Ponytopia will not be easy. The transition times will be confusing and frightening. Not all of us will make it. There will be sacrifices, human sacrifices. But rest assured, the road to Ponytopia will be paved with the glitter-encrusted skulls of our vanquished foes. So there is that, of course.
There's that.
This year is a very interesting year for me. This is arguably my first real campaign. I mean, I've been running for some 30 years, but quite frankly, many of those campaigns were not totally real. Now, I'm waving my arm in a circle with my right hand over here. This is, I'm making a Venn diagram for you. This circle here is Vermin Supreme's imaginary world of and universe of political unreality. This hand over here, the left one is making a circle. That one is reality. Now, interestingly, they overlap, and they've always overlapped a little bit because, of course, I exist in the real meat world. I interact with real life candidates. I interact with the press. All of these things. I raise money. I get on the ballot. You know, I've come in third and fourth in the New Hampshire primary on the Democratic ticket. So that part has always been very real. But ultimately, there was no way in heck that I was ever going to get the Democrat or the Republican nomination. Now, this last election in 2016, I also jumped into the Libertarian Party a little bit. They invited me to an event, and they welcomed me with such open arms. And so I went.
They
to
are
their
very
convention.
welcoming, I've found, for sure.
They were.
They're nice
And
people.
I went to their convention. And it was pretty fun, and half the people there, loved me being there, and they let me do whatever I wanted, and I got to totally, play with all the conventions of a political convention. And the other half didn't like it at all. But the half that liked it, really liked the fact that the other half did not like it. So there is that weird dynamic there. And I am literally, actually, in reality now, seeking the Libertarian Party nomination for the presidency. Their convention will be next May, and I have a crackerjack campaign staff and team, which is a totally new experience. And they've had real experience in other people's campaigns. Some of the people working on my campaign worked on John McAfee's campaign last go around. And they feel pretty confident that I will be able to obtain enough delegates that I could be the nominee for the Libertarian Party. There are arguments to be made why I would be a very good candidate. I have more name recognition than any other person currently in the race. My demographics with the young people are pretty much through the roof. I've got social media game. Of course, there are arguments against it. There are concerns. There are reservations. A lot of people are afraid that it would be making more of a mockery of the Libertarian Party than some people perceive it to be already. But I believe that all of these can be overcome. And the gold standard for LP candidate would be 5% of the general election. That would guarantee ballot access for all the Libertarian parties in the state. And so that's a very important thing. That would equal 6.5 million votes in the general. But, I do some quick math in my head. I say 3.9 million high school kids graduate every given year. So give me 2 of those years. Give me the 19 and the 20. So that's 8 million. Add that to 17 million kids who are in college. That's 25 million. So if I were able to get 1 out of 4 of those kids to vote for me, that would equal that 5%. So I've essentially been putting forth this idea, this narrative, or simply trying to get them to agree that my candidacy and my ability to get 5% is not inconceivable.
So you mentioned John McAfee. He's British, isn't he? I know he's a libertarian, but he I thought he was British.
I think that's so, and I think when you get right down to it, the U.S. Constitution puts out a number of requirements for you that would allow you to be the president of America, but it doesn't. There's no limitations on running for the president.
Gotcha.
In fact, that's one of the wonderful things that I really enjoy about running for president. It's a self-declarative statement.
Correct.
Anybody can do it. As soon as you say the magic words, "Hi, I'm running for president," it becomes an indisputable fact. No one can disprove it. You might not campaign. You might not get any campaign contributions. You might not get any votes. You might not even tell many people. But you could register with the FEC if you wanted to. It just becomes reality, and so that's a wonderful thing that I think a lot of people have found that they can take advantage of. And of course, this election year, another thing that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and now it looks like I might be able to do it, is achieve federal election matching funds.
Nice.
If one is able to raise $5,000 in contributions less than $250 in each of 20 states, the FEC will match that. And then that becomes like free money. And then every dollar that you raise on that, they'll match. And so it's a campaign of infinite potential. And I've brought it about this far. And now I have various teams of people who believe that they can propel it even further yet still. And so
let's say you had all of a sudden you got 10 grand. Where do you put that money? How does that first 10 grand, what does that look like? I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start there.
Well, so far I've raised about $6,000 for the campaign, and we spent about $5,000 of that. And that money has been spent on attending libertarian state conventions this past year. I've probably been to about 10 of them. Flight and expenses and convention fees and all that. Because my campaign staff tells me it's very important to show that you're serious. That if you're a serious candidate, you need to go to these things. So I've been doing that. And of course, there's a strategy involved because many, many people, of course, naturally assume or believe, or all they've seen is things they've seen on the internet, and they think I'm a crazy person, or they think I'm simply a meme. And so we've been going to these events to show them that the boot is not attached to my head at all times, that I am not my character, that I'm not always on, and that I'm a fairly, not always disrupting things, and that I'm a pretty reasonable character. So essentially, I'm trying to make an offer to the LP. I'm not trying to take over the party. I'm not trying to prank them. I'm just making an offer, offering my services, and if they take it, that will be a pretty exciting thing. I mean, it would be a full-on, amazing ride. I mean, realistically, it's the only chance in hell that I'll probably could get on all 50 state ballots. And I believe that if I am, I believe it could go viral. I believe it could be an amazing thing for America.
I'm reading, of course, I'm reading the Bible of online libertarianism, and that's Wikipedia, and it's showing me the 2020 Libertarian Party presidential primary. One thing you notice right away is that Dan Berman's got a big hat, which, I don't know if he thinks that that's compulsory to wear a big hat for this one, but you're the guy with the hat. And then there's two women on there, and they're represented by silhouettes. Any idea why there's no photo of Soraya and Kim on the Libertarian Wikipedia page? That's odd.
I would have to assume that they have not provided them, I guess.
Campaign funding.
Yeah. Apparently, they cannot afford a camera.
It's tough. It's tough. Tough on the trail.
So I don't know if you're contenders. Yes, I mean, I did not have one for years. So maybe they just didn't have a camera, or maybe they don't know anybody with a camera. I'm not really sure about that.
So the last thing that I want to hit upon, of course, is one of the favorites of my people that listen to this show, and we're talking about, of course, disclosure. And Bernie Sanders has already mentioned that if he's elected president, he will, he'll disclose anything the government knows about UFOs. I don't know if anything, but that's what he says now. What does the government disclosure mean to you? And are you a proponent of letting us know, the United States of America, that we are not alone?
I'm going to be in the front. I'm going to be the first one at Area 51, baby. I have experience.
They need a good promoter, too.
We used to go backcountry into the Nevada nuclear test site. I think Area 51 will be a similar experience.
It's a breeze, no radiation.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think of that disclosure thing? And do we get every detail from you?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Full disclosure. Open the floodgates. Declassify everything. Let's figure it out. Let's clap them aliens.
Let's do it. So it's been an amazing night to have you, Vermin Supreme, in the studio. And with that, as always, I do this for all my guests. I would like to give you the final word, please, sir.
Friends, as you know, there has indeed been a slight tear in the time-space continuum. This has caused some minor interruptions in our current time stream. I would like to assure you that I have very smart scientists working on a solution to this problem in the past, in the present, and in the future. I feel confident that we will return to a Vermin Supreme presidency at any moment. I apologize for any inconvenience in the meantime. Let me assure you, my friends, together we will ride our ponies into a zombie-powered future. Thank you. My name's Vermin Supreme. Visit my campaign website, https://verminsupreme2020.com. Buy the book, buy my merch, and by golly, if you know any college kids, I'm a college speaking guy. Also, please, if you have the opportunity to watch just one documentary this year, please watch the documentary entitled Who is Vermin Supreme? It's available on the internet, YouTube, Amazon Prime, and places like that, I believe. And it's a very informative documentary, which covers a whole lot of my whole project for the past 30 years, and a lot of things that we didn't even get to touch upon tonight. So check it out, people. And thank you for your support. And if you know any libertarians, send them my way. If you want to work on my campaign, drop me a note through the Facebook machine, Vermin Supreme for President. It's the blue check mark. I'm at Vermin Supreme on Twitter. I think I've got Instagram and God knows what else. I don't know. Who knows? Thank you.
Vermin Supreme, Libertarian President, Candidate, friend of My Alien Life podcast. Thank you very much, sir.
You, sir, are welcome.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.